It's the big week log, week 25. Things are coming along. We are now officially on track for confirmation. The date is locked and well penciled in, 28th of September. So I've got about 2 months to get this ready to go. A little less than two. In fact, nearly exactly 2 months because you need to get everything in 2 weeks before, naturally. So, what does that mean? That means filling out a web form. That means doing a timeline and a learning plan. All very straightforward. I think I've already drafted one previously. But the substantive bit of work is the confirmation document or the proof of progress document. So, that is 10 to 15,000 words. And it covers your literature review, your proposed methodology, any of the ethical research ethics considerations that need to be taken into account. Of course, that's going to have to be a whole separate application, but the point is that they're looking. So the whole point of the confirmation is to make sure that you're on track. It's not to verify that necessarily so much as it is to, because you haven't done any work yet, but it's more along the lines of like, is the research that you're proposing viable? Is it going to work? Because the last thing you want is someone investing 3 years of their time and then turning in a report at the end being like, well, that was a total failure. That did not work at all. So, it's in other words, is the scope good? Which is obviously something I've grappled with a little bit, too ambitious for my own good. Is the methodology matching the scope? Is the research question good? Is it relevant? Is it useful? Is it going to be something that'll be beneficial to you professionally or academically going forward? So, to that end, we now have what I think might be the finalized research question. So, allow me to elaborate on that. So, under what circumstances is it ethically justifiable for a government in Australia to use artificial intelligence to impact the circulation of extremist ideas on publicly facing social media platforms using interventions that use AI generated text as part of efforts to counter online extremism? Question mark. All right, breaking that down. Under what circumstances is obviously what's the criteria? Is it ethically justifiable for a government in Australia? So we narrowed that down. Originally, we were saying we brought that back out actually. Originally, we are talking about hmm, okay. Sorry, the audio might have just changed on me all of a sudden. Did I just land on a button? Whatever. Um, okay. So government in Australia. We were originally talking Victorian government. We'd narrowed it down. We've now brought it back out to government in Australia because, well, frankly, the federal government may be the more relevant group here, considering they've most recently regulated the neo-Nazis and attempting to put legislation in place there. Really bad legislation, but legislation. Um, yeah, and it should be transferable between any government, realistically. I mean, the state governments are in charge of criminal stuff, but the federal government's in charge of security and ASIO and intelligence and all this sort of thing. So realistically, it should be transferable between any of them. To use artificial intelligence, we've walked that back from agentic back to artificial intelligence in general because based on what I now understand about agentic AIs, it's basically a whole bunch of LLMs or Gen AIs in a trench coat. Point being is that the systems aren't fundamentally different. Agentic AI is not a fundamentally different type of system. It's just a bunch of existing systems such as they work. So the theory is that the ethical code should work on an LLM, a Gen AI, or an agentic AI because they're all functioning more or less the same way. Okay. To impact the circulation of extremist ideas, so originally we're saying limit or monitor. Why be exclusive? So we've moved it to impact on publicly facing social media platforms. So originally saying X or Twitter and walked it back a little bit there because again, it should be universalizable. It shouldn't really matter as long as it's publicly facing because we're not going for WhatsApp or Messenger or anything like Signal or any of these private chat groups because you don't have access. And also, I don't care if they go underground because the point is to stop them from recruiting. So it's publicly facing social media platforms it is. This could, for example, include things as obviously Facebook, it's Instagram. It could also include YouTube, for example, LinkedIn, hypothetically. God knows. Geez, it'd be funny if they would. Anyway, using interventions that use AI generated text. So this is our way of not getting too fussy about the specific intervention. So originally I was saying pre-bunking was the method that I prefer. But Mateo's of the opinion, my supervisor is the opinion that since the PhD isn't really about which intervention to use, realistically, the threshold, the ethical code should apply for any intervention that uses AI generated text. So we're not talking banning him. We're not talking, you know, massively disruptive stuff, but we could be including, for example, counter speech, which will be higher risk, but not that much higher risk. So as part of efforts to counter online extremism. So yeah, context as always. So that is where we are sitting. So the big thing to do now is to type up this 15,000 word document, which for the uninitiated sounds like a lot of words. It's not a lot of words. Not when you get stuck into something like this. I think, well, I mean, literature review notations thus far over the last few months are already something like 8,000 words. So it's, and after the book, whew, after writing a book, I can blast out 5,000 words in a day. Not a problem. Um, you just need to get into the habit of it. Take a little while to get back into the groove, but it really won't be hard. I once wrote a 10,000 report in a week, and that was with Vic Pol. I got very enthusiastic. Not that they read it, but either way. So I've got to write that up. That will be literature review. That will be a summary of everything there. I've got a bit of notation to catch up on. Unfortunately, I've been neglecting that a little bit, and there's a bunch of studies that I still need to finish reading. I got 2 months. Um, and realistically, I can get through like 3 papers a day, just audio, and then notate. But it hasn't been my priority for the last few months. From there, it's methodologies. So, methodology in this case is how am I going to gather the data I need to answer this question? So, the first part of that is probably a mixed methods methodology, which is to say qualitative and quantitative, which is to say interviews and testing. So, there's no demographic data for this one. It's not really that relevant, right? Like X number of people did X over Y period of time. There's no mass movements here. What we are looking at is, so first and foremost, I need to do some interviews because I need to understand what the current governance arrangements are for the use of AI when it comes to CVE and the use of AI in general, but the use of AI for counter-violent extremism work and what it should be according to people in the space. Now, we've already started reaching out to a lot of these people, as previously mentioned in these sessions, and but that's all off the books, so to speak. I can't use that data. It's just used to inform me, but I can't put it into the report because I haven't got research ethics approval. So I can't gather the data, I can't formalize the data, and I can't publish the data because there was no guarantees of privacy, there was no risk management, etc. And the risks on this is pretty minimal. As far as human research ethics approval goes, it is probably higher than low risk, but which means I'll have to put a proper approval in. But that's mainly just because there's reputational issues, and some people might not want their names published next to the material. So you need to store all of the primary information carefully, securely. Again, not that anyone cares enough to do anything about this, but this is just good practice. Certainly incredibly low stakes compared to what I did with the police, which is hilarious because we got human research ethics approval there, but only found out about the existence of that process like after we'd done the first one. So anyway, okay. So methodology first will be interviews. What is the state of governance in this space? What should it be according to people who are familiar with this space? That'll give me a baseline, useful baseline. Where are we at? Where does everyone think we should be? Okay, how does my ethical framework work around that? Second, we'll just be literature, looking into every ethical framework that we can find. That shouldn't be too hard. Generally speaking, they're going to be, if I'm going to take a guess based on what I've seen so far, it'll be a whole bunch of virtue ethics, which is to say transparency. Be transparent. No definition to that word. No consequences if you breach it, but we won't know anyway because we can't measure it because we didn't define it. Oh, I hate bloody ethics sometimes. Anyway, yeah, so, but that is likely to be where we're at. We've already found a couple of interesting edge cases. So, for example, the finance sector. Uh, Thanks to the person that gave me these insights, but the finance sector, for example, has existing monitoring regimes in place for organized crime or terrorists using the financial sector. Now, having a bank account is a human right, and therefore it can't be denied except under extreme circumstances, right? So canceling or shutting down a bank account is actually a pretty big deal. So they are beholden to federal regulations that basically say that, you need to monitor, and if it hits a certain threshold, then you're not allowed to, then you need to alert us, and we will take appropriate action. And that's all good. That's very good. That's very well established. There's also a bit of a baseline for me when it comes to, under what threshold is it acceptable to intervene into something like this with potential human rights implications. The interesting thing is I asked them about whether they use agentic AI or use AI to do that, and they said no and will not. Why? I asked. Well, because they're liable. They're flat out liable, which is to say that one failure could have pretty serious consequences, and they are held liable for that by the government. I'm not sure what that liability involves, but I'm assuming it involves a big fat fine. So interesting. So there's your counterexample. The industry will not use AI to automate its tasks when they will suffer direct personal consequences for failures of the AI. So interesting, right? Okay, so second thing I need to do is understand all of the existing ethics in the space and build an ethical framework. But third is probably going to come down to, when it comes to methodology, is probably going to come down to testing and refinement, because what we ultimately want to be able to do here is to plug this into the AI, this ethical framework. And there's methodologies that doing that, which are quite compelling, that will be more reliable and avoid hallucination and, emergent behavior and all this sort of nastiness. So yeah, and basically see if it targets correctly. So there's going to be two parts to this ethical frame. The first is going to be essentially a targeting algorithm of, here is the threshold. If a group passes this threshold, look for groups that pass this threshold. Those are your groups. Second is, what do you do? So deploying the interventions, AI generated text, which is either going to be pre-bunking or counter speech most likely, but could involve other activities, and may involve just flat out monitoring, though that's already pretty well done. No, actually, that's not necessarily true. It's capable. It's we're capable of doing it. It's whether or not it's being done proactively is a different question. So having identified target groups, what you do and who is responsible for what you do to intervene there. So that's going to come down to determining responsibility throughout the network. So, for example, is the social media company responsible? Is the government responsible? Is the user responsible? How is everyone responsible in this? How am I responsible for this? I designed the damn thing, right? So we'll need to make sure that one, that it targets correctly, and two, that any response that it makes is well governed. So that'll take some testing. Basically, we'll have to set up some dummy accounts, and we'll have to just let it run and see what it does. Again, the whole thing about the AI field is that it's so unbelievably experimental and ill-defined. Like, the ability to reproduce results is minimal, like what you're meant to be able to do with, right? Like, just imagine you're designing some sort of chemical process, right, in a lab. You need to be able to say, we did X and that led to Y. And then someone else needs to be able to do and follow your instructions and show that, yes, doing X led to Y consistently. This is called reproducibility, right? Like, it demonstrates that the method is good. AI is tough because it's a black box. You don't own the inside of it. In fact, I'm not entirely convinced that people designing it are necessarily fully au fait with how it functions on the inside. Maybe they are. Maybe I'm being cynical, but it's a risk, right? So, and for a researcher who didn't design the AI from scratch, who has the resources, right? If you ask an AI to follow a set of instructions, do X, get Y, you don't know how it did it. Not really. You know, broad strokes, what you asked it to do and what you got. And here's the problem, is that if another researcher tells the AI to do X and gets Y and it gets Z, it's not reproducible. Unfortunately, this is the norm for AI. Any two uses of it are going to get different results, even from the same user with the same query, right? Which is problematic. It's because we can't say with certainty that we know what we're doing or that the method is good. Fortunately, this is something that social sciences has a bit of experience in. Social sciences are notoriously, people call it the soft sciences, and you'll often find online conspiracy theories about, the social sciences aren't real science because, they can't, reproduce results and the methodologies are too loose and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the problem fundamentally is that a social science is dealing with so many variables right? As soon as a human being, let alone a group of them, is involved in any sort of experiment, the controllability of that experiment goes right out the window, right? The mood the person is, the traffic the day before the experiment is going to affect the experiment, right? Because if the person got in late, you can't control for that. There's too many variables, right? So you do your best, but there's always going to be a margin of error when it comes to large, like complicated experiments like this. It's not a lab where you know for certain that X chemical went in and Y chemical came out. Anything that involving people is going to be messy. And AI is also messy. So fortunately, this is something that social sciences are relatively well equipped to deal with. So we approximate results. We can't guarantee them. So but still better than just guessing or throwing something at the wall, or worse of all, just assuming you're going to get X result and then just going ahead, which you might notice. Business management. I intended for policy to produce X result. Therefore, policy will produce X result. Oh, it didn't? Well, clearly it's the employee's fault. My God, that's the Victoria Police in a nutshell. Anyway, so that's where we're at. Confirmation doc, 15,000 words, doing a little bit of work in the meantime on sovereign citizens. Classification, notoriously hard to classify, but we're going to start drawing on US definitions. So that's a starting point. When that inevitably produces false positive, false negatives, I should say, well, we can just take that back to the people funding the research. So yeah, good progress coming along. Bloody hell, it's cold. I should really get back out into the forge. The funny thing is like working in the forge is perfect in this weather, but the travel between the house and the forge is too cold and it puts me off. Yeah, no, got a new project. I'll have a crack at it on Saturday. So, yeah. Anyway, that's where we're at.